The last book you read and who was it by?
Last book I read. I guess it's I just reread Lord of the Rings, and I can't remember the name of the author, but I just pretty much reread the first book.
If you were to summarize the book in one sentence, what would you say about it?
For me, I guess nostalgic. It's just something I read like every 2 to 3 years, so it just kind of brings back memories.
What's one thing that you personally took away from the book?
Just a sense of optimism, even in dark times, and we know we're kind of in dark times right now. There's always something to be optimistic about in the long run.
Okay.
Don't get bogged down in the in the day to day, but there's always hope.
Who would you recommend the book to?
Oh, I guess just everybody. Everybody. Who wouldn't you recommend a book to?
What's the last book you read and who was it by?
I'm pretty sure the last book I read was The Hunger Games by, I'm blanking on the author's name.
If you could summarize the book in one sentence, what would you say about it?
It's a really good book. There's a lot of action and drama, and it's really intense. There's a lot of cliffhangers, so you just want to keep reading.
What's one thing that you personally took away from the book?
I took away that you kind of have to persevere, through things.
Who would you recommend the book to?
Really, anybody that likes action and just wants to keep reading a really good book.
What's the last book you read and who was it by?
So last book I read was Hind's Feet on High Places by Hannah Bernard.
If you could summarize the book in one sentence, what would you say about it?
That you don't have anything to be afraid of when you have the person that you don't have to be afraid of with.
Who would you recommend the book to?
Everybody.
What's one thing that personally stood out to you from the book?
That love conquers fear.
What's the last book you read and who was it by?
The last book I read was called The Marrow Thieves, and the author's name is Cherie Dimaline, and I might be pronouncing that wrong. I don't know how it's pronounced.
If you could summarize the book in a few sentences, what would you say about it?
Yeah, so it's a dystopian young adult fiction book about a post-climate world, and it takes place in Canada, where all white people have lost the ability to dream, but all Indigenous people can still dream, and so they're being chased and hunted down for their bone marrow. And it's terrifying, but it follows a group of survivors as they kind of run away and they learn to survive and become kind of a found family of close friends.
What's something that personally stood out to you or a takeaway message from the book?
Yeah, so the book was absolutely devastating. I cried through it. It was so sad, but I felt the ending was ultimately hopeful because it felt like even when you have nothing left to live for, you can still find something, whether that is your culture, your family, your friends, that there's always something to cling to and to keep living for.
What's the last book you read and who was it by?
I'm reading Dante's Inferno.
If you could summarize the book in one sentence, what would you say about it?
It's just a book about the philosophical things behind what's classified as sin and why you go to hell for it.
What's one thing that personally stood out to you from the book?
I think the way it's written, it's really beautiful.
Who would you recommend the book to?
I went into that kind of introspective reading.
What's the last book you read and who was it by?
The last book I read was Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Myers.
If you were to summarize the book in just one sentence, what would you say about it?
I would say that it is emotionally thrilling.
Who would you recommend the book to?
I would recommend the book to anybody who loves vampires.
What's one thing that personally stood out to you from the book or like a takeaway message?
Ever date a vampire and always date the werewolf.